Welcome to a IIPP In Conversations. So we have another excellent discussion lined up for you. Everybody here in the audience, welcome, and welcome people online as well. So if you want to wave to your friends who are online, you can do so as well. And there is also a chat and Q&A function for people online, so I will be monitoring, so I'll be not checking my email if I'm looking at the phone. So I'll be doing actually checking the chat going on. And my name is Kattel. I'm a professor and deputy director here at IIPP. My own research focus is very much on public sector and innovation in all its glory and gory, I guess, as well. So there are beautiful things, but also very difficult things. And today we have a somewhat of a, let's say, like a launch or a UK launch of a report that came out a couple of months ago. And the lead author of that report sits next to me, Francesca Bria. Francesca is a honorary professor here at IIPP, and she has been with us from the very beginning, talking to students, teaching students, but also involved in our research. And she is, as I always say, a rare practitioner that has academic chops as well. So she has been working with us on various academic papers and research, and so has been a very important guide for us around data and city, and increasingly also data, city, and sustainability, and particularly from the European, I think, perspective. And yeah, so she was a chief technology officer in City of Barcelona for a number of years, particularly during the pivotal years of Ada Colau's administration, and really one of the architects of why many of you probably know Barcelona today, about data deals and all of those things that are have been really foundational for many other European cities. She then went on to work for Italian Innovation Fund, again from the working with private sector, but from the public sector perspective. And I think that's probably, these are the very good keywords for your current work as well, trying to bring public and private actors across Europe really together around this issue of governing data for public value or public interest, or however we want to call it. And this is what the report is about, and we will discuss that. How can cities deal with all the data that's been generated? All of you created data as you came here. None of you own it. I don't know whether you care or not, but we are here to care that the city that the data that we create, that the city we create through data, is actually also being governed towards public value. And so you're part of the new powerhouse movement and committee that is trying to take these issues forward in the European cities. So how the sort of the panel discussion will look like: we first hear from Francesca to introduce the report. And then we have physically next to me is Theo Blackwell, who's a chief digital officer at City of London, and not only because we are in London physically, it's great to hear from a London civil servant, as it were, but I think also London City has been in many ways pioneering, as has been Barcelona, in terms of data, digital presence, and I think it's very interesting to hear where London is today. What is the future outlook? And so we hopefully have this kind of conversation. I'll be in the middle of this. And then we have also at 6 o'clock, I think we have a Henri Verdier, a French ambassador, digital ambassador at large, I think is that the official title? So he's representing French government in the digital space. So it's a very sort of internet kind of thing to be a digital ambassador. And he'll join online, so we'll see him on the screen. Very digital, yeah. But he is a real person, so he's just not an avatar. And he, because of course France is one of the leading European countries, and they do very interesting thing in the space of digital public infrastructure and all of those things. So it's again great to hear from that perspective as well. So everybody here in the room, so if you have questions, comments to all of the three people, not me. I mean, I'll be just sort of. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I am. Oh yeah, I forgot. Well, yes, we have a great colleague. I'm sure he's online, Fernando Monga. So hello to Fernando, and Fernando is one of the key authors here in the book, and I was just helping along a bit here and there. So yes, if you have questions and comments, please have them ready. Same goes for online. have them ready. I'll be monitoring the chat. Ready?
So I will tell you a little bit the story of the project and how this report came about. I think also because connecting it with a little bit with the Barcelona story. Have you heard about the work of the City of Barcelona in data and digital democracy? Some of you, yes, because they're my students. Okay, so I will be short connecting that. But I think, the reason why I started working with the City of Hamburg was because of my work in the City of Barcelona. So I've been actually, it's a nice story because I was one day they called me from the Ministry of Finance in Germany when Olaf Scholz was the Minister of Finance. Now he's the German Chancellor, and to have a debate with him about those questions of democratizing the digital economy, and is it possible that citizens are really, they have more power with the digital transformation, or is the digital transformation actually going to be, about monopolies and more power to the companies? And then we had this conversation in a big conference, Republica. I don't know if you know it, in Germany, is like the leading technology conference with a lot of hackers and digital activists and so on. And, Olaf Scholz used to be the mayor of Hamburg. And I have to say the conversation was pretty interesting because obviously being the Minister of Finance, he was, a bit like, let's say a bit shy on this topic. And I was the one, kind of pushing, and I was saying, well, we need to do more and we need to devolve the power to the citizens and so on. And Olaf Scholz got a lot of critique from the audience that, Germany wasn't doing enough and that, yes, we have to rebalance the power in the digital economy. And then, after a while, his team, his previous team that now is running the City of Hamburg, with the help of a newly created institute, which is called the New Institute in Hamburg. So it's kind of an intermediary, not too dissimilar from the IIPP, a bit less academic, but they also do fellowships. It's a very interesting place. They called me and they said, well, we are really interested to know more about how you regain, let's say, democratic control of data in the City of Barcelona, and come here to meet the mayor of Hamburg and his team to see what we can do here. So I went there, and I didn't know much about Hamburg. It's a fantastic city and so on, but they do have a track record, which is very important in the digital space, because they were one of the first cities that came up with the transparency law a long time ago. I think it was at the end of the 90s, pioneering, let's say, the open data movement. I don't know how many of you remember. Upon a time, it was about open data. So it was about public administration opening up their data, being super transparent about what they were doing. And in particular, opening up the data would allow, in our mindset, open source communities, activists, engaged citizens, but also startups and so on, to work with that data and build services with that data. And at that time, the problem was actually that public administrations didn't want to release the data because they kept the data for themselves somehow, and also because data knowledge is power, and why should I give the power away? But also because, of course, with data you can measure a lot of the policy successes. So you can measure what works, what doesn't. You can see if actually, someone says something, I'm going to allocate money there because there is an actual need, but this is not really the case. You can see that the city is polluted. You can see that, you can measure the traffic problems. You can see where, where things are not really working. So public administration has always been, let's say, very reluctant to opening up their data. But then Hamburg pioneered this transparency law and the open data movement. But somehow, as a paradox, today, in the world of today, where data is the raw material of the digital economy, it's a commodity, it's training artificial intelligence, it's creating new monopolies, in particular in the era of AI. And, we know what are the problems with very few companies, in particular private companies, also in public space, in the urban space, holding on real critical data for public administrations to do good policy, take better decisions, implement the policy the citizens need. The public interest. It's somehow it's very difficult for public administrations if you don't have the right data to do those kind of things. And somehow Hamburg opening up their data, they didn't think about, but how now, in an era where we have all these private monopolies, how we get the return back? How do we get the data back for the public interest? How we can use the private data that's in the city? Think about now all these micromobilities, all these scooters, electric bicycles that are going around at the city and so on, collecting data all the time. Some of those businesses actually only, they start the businesses just to collect the data, because then, they know more about us, they know more about the city, then they maximize, they basically use this data, and then they leave the bicycle there, they close the startup, but they have more data about us, so they can move on to the next business. That's how it works. So if you think about this and all the critical data, we are losing public power. We are losing the ability to use this data for the benefit of the citizens. And so while in Barcelona, my work was really about, let's say, using public procurement, so using the data that the city has via public procurement, public tender, and integrated clauses in public procurement contracts that are saying, okay, if I procure, for example, the internet connection or the service to clean the roads or the water management system or anything I procure, the critical asset, the data, should be given back to the city in machine-readable format, and that data, which is paid with taxpayers' money, because you are paying the service, should not be kept in the hands of the private providers. Should be a public infrastructure, should be a public good that belongs to the citizens that pay the taxes. I mean, seems logical, but this wasn't the case. So we had to put public procurement data sovereignty clauses in public procurement, and in this way, the city of Barcelona actually created a new institution that is the Metropolitan Data Office, where now they're working 40 people, more or less. Before it didn't existed when I became the CDO. And in this way, so they could basically maximize the use of the public data and turn them into a public digital infrastructure. But we didn't really tackle the problem of the data that's not in the hands of the city. So the Uber, the Airbnb, the providers, the micromobility, and so on. And this was what we were trying to do in Hamburg. So let me see, because I also want to show you I have some slides which are basically just as background slides, but it reminds me. So another very interesting thing for me at that moment when I started to work in Hamburg was the fact that Europe at the moment is going through a very important point with all the regulation around the digital economy, in particular the Artificial Intelligence Act, the Data Act, and the Digital Service Act, and so on. And in the Data Act, in particular during the pandemic, public administrations realized that basically they didn't have, enough tools, let's say, to do anything with the data. For example, think about the COVID app, or think about, they had to alert citizens of the danger and so on. So they started thinking about, okay, we really need to put some public interest, let's say, mandating data access for public interest. So you have now in the Data Act of the European Commission a chapter of the legislation that says that in public interest cases, the public administration can mandate to the big companies to access data for public interest. But the public interest is defined in very, let's say, emergency terms. So the public interest is like a pandemic, is like, a disaster. It's like something that happens, we just need the data because it's really terrible. And we were trying to advocate, and that's what we do in this report, that public interest is also tackling climate change, is improving mobility, is improving access to, to housing for people. It's, doing a lot of the things that public administration are supposed to do normally. And so we basically worked on an applied case in Hamburg, which is regulating data-driven, let's say, regulation of micromobility. And what we did is actually experimenting with private to public to society data sharing for public interest. So we didn't limit the transfer of private data to the government. We also made sure that the private data coming from the company could be then opened up for societal use. And this is very complicated in legal terms because this implies that then you give access to third parties of this data, because we thought that on one side, new companies, maybe innovative companies, maybe a designer, maybe journalists, maybe an NGO, whoever is able to use that data to create added value, to create a new application, a new service, some new information, it could give back, to the pool of data that the city administration has. And also because, let's face it, the city administration is not going to be able to build the services alone. We need collaboration. And there are a lot of companies which are already doing this work, maybe a startup, maybe a smaller company, which has an innovative solution. So we thought, why don't we do a challenge to experiment with this? So we basically collaborated with some micromobility companies, an IoT company that was gathering all the data, all the sensor data, and then like another innovative company, and the bigger company, which is like Transport for London, basically the equivalent of Transport for London. And then we did this challenge. So we enabled the transfer of data from the private to the public administration, and then open it up for them to solve the problem, which was basically increasing, regulating this micromobility services, but also increasing bike lanes, increasing sustainable spaces for sustainable mobility, basically really improving the sustainable mobility of the city of Hamburg. Now, what is interesting, I think, in our experiment, so the main concept we have been working around is turning data from an asset, a monetary asset that can be monetized and accumulated by private company, into what we define as a digital common, into a public digital infrastructure. And this is, I think, a very important concept, because basically it allows you to rethink the ownership regime of data. So who is really in control? Who should be owning this data when we're talking about digital cities or smart cities or now digital twins? But also, I think the point is, how do we go beyond the limitations of the regulatory environment? Because you will maybe talk about that, but now if you talk to public administration, they will tell you, this is not allowed because on one side we're going to have privacy protection problems, so you have the GDPR or you have like privacy laws, and we're not allowed to share the data because of privacy reasons. And on the other side, of course, companies cannot share their data because they are trade secrets. So if they reveal the data, they will have competition problems. So those are usually the type of obstacles, and then they will say, well, there is a lot of liability because we are not able to aggregate the data, to anonymize the data, and also we don't have enough money to maintain the infrastructure. So you will incur all of these kind of problems. So we believe that data is actually a particular digital common where you need the public infrastructure. So you need an actual public administration, you need long-term investments, you need to have an infrastructure that's maintained publicly and governed publicly, but you can both keep the privacy of the people, so don't manage the data. The government doesn't need to manage your data, so the data can be managed exactly as a common good, can be with cryptography, kept in, data spaces which are controlled by the users themselves, so the solutions are there, the technical solutions. And also, we can preserve the trade secret of the companies, because you don't need to reveal information that give you a competitive advantage vis-a-vis another rival, another competitor. You are able to share this data as a pool, as an aggregated asset, for the public administration to use it to take better decisions without infringing the trade secret on one side and the privacy on the other side. So this is just because those are the type of problems that the public administration will tell you we have when we face this question. Then, of course, there is, I think, an important thing I want to mention is that you have all like some dimension, for example, the regulatory dimension, which now is, maybe Theo will talk about that, because you have the local level, then you have the city, the local, you have the borough, yeah. Then you have the city level. Then sometimes in the case of Hamburg, Hamburg is a city-state, so you also have a kind of intermediary level of state. And then you have the federal level and the European level. So you have very different level of governance. So and then you have the regulatory, the business organizational side, and the technical side. They are interlinked. So you can't have a technical solution without having understood how you deal with the regulatory and the organizational part. And you have to integrate that, which means you need a multidisciplinary team. You need lawyers. Since we were working in Germany, just a bit joke about the Germans. On a certain point in the project, we had I think 6 lawyers in the table. I'm not exaggerating. Working out all the details about what we were doing. It seems something simple, but it was really complicated at a legal level, and it wasn't done before. So they were like, yeah, but what is the risk? What is the liability? And I was like, well, please sandbox it. If you really don't want to face the legal problems, we're going to study the legal part, but we need to run the experiment, and we can have a sandbox, which is something you do in innovation projects. But then actually it was more because the legal uncertainty can block the innovative part, while actually the legislation is done to enable it. Like if you actually look at the European legislation, you can do it. It's done to experiment it. Cities have the power to do it. Anyway, so you have to go through this complicated process. And we also found out three main learnings. The first one is that we need, as public administrations, we need to move on from test beds, from small experiments to roll out at scale. And this means that we need, commitment, investment, scale. So scale, which also means critical mass. And we have to have the courage at the political level to go ahead with it. Like now we know how this works, so we need to integrate clauses in public procurement. We need to integrate requirements when we do legal tenders and in the way we spend public money. So these clauses have to be there. And we don't have to do it in London or in Barcelona or in Hamburg only. We can do it at a European level. With the UK, it's going to be a bit difficult. Maybe with the new government, they're going to go like, yeah. But anyways, but you will get there. Then the second question is exactly because these digital twin cities are happening, and cities are working with the same problems, the same technology, actually buying big tech, buying from the big tech a lot of this technology instead of being much more autonomous, and instead of coming together at scale to do, to build the infrastructure they need to roll out their own solutions and their own services. But anyways, we need these shared use cases, because we can't all the time start from scratch. So now, for example, we are looking at building a repository of use cases, because each type of data will be different from the type of problems you're solving, the different sectors, the different type of data you have. So we need to harmonize these use cases across Europe, and we can do it. And the third thing we learned is that we need to actually build, yes, Theo, I'm getting there, new institutions, because we do need data intermediary in public interest. Data intermediaries that would allow us to have exactly this exchange of private, public, and citizen data, govern them with specific rules that maximize the public interest and not just the business interest of few companies. And I think in this audience may resonate something like the BBC for data. Sorry, now I'm gonna get some. No, because basically it's almost like next generation of public services. That's what we need to build. And those type of institutions, which is going to be publicly funded, because we need this to be long-term finance for the people, with maybe with taxation money, maybe with other instruments. It has to be long-term, it has to be public, but then it has to be independent because, you know, the state can't govern it for a lot of reasons, in particular when it's about data, which is critical to our democracy, privacy, civic liberties, and so on. We think it's better it's independent, like the BBC, like the public sector. It should be like central banks even, yes, exactly. So it should be this kind of hybrid, and the data intermediary would allow us also to have a very strong mission, defined mission, and also to decide, for example, okay, when you want to open it up, this data, I mean, now let's think about the artificial intelligence, you know, time where you really need to have high quality data, which is checked for, you know, then the modeling that you're going to do for AI. And you can decide, for example, for NGOs, research purposes, students, small companies, you can give it without compensation. If you give a lot of data to the Google of this world, of course, you need a business model. At this moment, public administration are paying big tech to get back their own data, which is absurd in a market that's completely opaque and that we don't know how it works. And all these contracts, unfortunately, are protected by NDAs, not public, and so we don't know what's happening with this trading of personal information and data. But we do know it's a very fundamental, you know, critical part of how we transform then the public infrastructure. So I think I will. Let me see if I didn't. Well, I had a lot of information, but I think it's fine. I mean, if you read the report, it will clarify all the methodology, how we did it. At this moment, maybe something interesting to say. This is actually our intermediary, the data intermediary scheme that we have, which is going to be, how it's going to work. But I think maybe one important topic is that now we are starting in Germany, I mean, conversation at the federal level and with other cities, because there is interest to scale this project and to have more cities and scale it at the national level there. But my interest, and I don't know if Henri is already connected or not. Yeah, and that's also the reason why we thought it was good to have him in the conversation, is that when we're talking about data commons and building interoperable, open, public digital infrastructures, we are really talking about a coordinated effort at a European level. And at the moment, I think while a lot of money and investment is going on one side, more and more on military and defense, for obvious reasons, because we have a war, and now in Europe we're only talking about defense money. A lot of venture capital money and a lot of investment is going in the commercial applications. Very little is actually going to build the critical digital infrastructures on top of which we build essential services of society, and we are shrinking the public space radically. I mean, I would say even that there is not so much public in the digital space at all. So I think we need to really get serious about this, and I'm very happy that there is an initiative now which is called EDIC, with the backing of the French government, the German government, and the Dutch government, and maybe others and more to come, that are about, you know, creating a new fund and new instruments to build digital public infrastructures as alternative to the monopolistic models that we see in the digital society. I keep it here. Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much for this tour de force, and we can come to various aspects of, including geopolitics, industrial policy, that all play into that. And just before I give the floor to Henri, one of the most startling facts I remember from the discussions in Hamburg was when the city officials were talking about when they as they are sort of trying to develop new services in transportation, they have to buy data from Google. But it's a public data about transportation, and they have to go and buy it rather than actually have a way of accessing that same data, which I think was quite mind-boggling. And of course, if you have to buy something, it becomes a contract, it becomes difficult to do it, and so you actually don't do it because it's such a difficult thing. So, but I hope Henri, you can hear us. And I already introduced you to the audience, at least in the room. I think my mic wasn't actually switched on for the people in the for the introductions. You were completely switched on. But so if you can switch on Henri's camera, and if you're there, if you can hear us, How does it look? Oh yeah, but yeah, he seems to be here. But oh no, he. Or, well, let's see. Hopefully, it's a digital space after all. So it shows it. It always pays to come in person. Yeah. So I think we will go directly to Theo and hear your reaction. And as I said, London, and you mentioned also Transport for London being one of the major data repositories that is actually quite open with that data. I think, but anything you want to react to would be great.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating because it reflects very much our journey rebuilding the London Data Store, which was created in 2010 in the kind of reflecting the Obama era push for open data. A lot of cities invested in open data platforms. And now what we're doing in London is rebuilding that platform. I can't reveal the name. Same branding agency that did the overground lines, though. But the idea behind it, and I don't think you can really talk about urban data without kind of linking it to the sort of historic smart cities debate. And I think the challenge with that, it was very solutionist, and it was predicated on harvesting lots of data and sort of summoning up visions of sort of Hunger Games style digital twins and data repositories big data lakes that would just suck in all of the data in the city. And I think actually the reality between cities is a lot more complex and different. The way we're building our new data platform is really going with the grain of how London is governed, because of course data resides in London's boroughs and universities and TfL and the police. So we've got a very, very federated structure. So what we're doing is essentially creating a data library of where the data sets are and what they are, a kind of metadata library, to use the sort of technical term, so that if you want to create something with that data, or you want to find the data in order to create a product or a service, you can easily do so. So we've looked at all of the pain points of data sharing in our city, and are creating a platform to get over the sort of technical side of it. But that's kind of only about 20% of the work. The rest is about process and human beings. How do we get the right legal structure so we can share that data safely and ethically? How can we create a method of what is a good data service? And we're relying on our friend Mike Bracken there, who worked with us to create a data service standard. So following very closely the government service standard on creating services around the needs of users, iterating, and a range of other factors, we can create a kind of a quality standard for something good that's created by data. So it kind of reflects the values of our city when we're sharing that data. We also want to create a community of data users. One of the challenges of open data and open data platforms is that it was so open, it didn't actually ask you who you were. And why would it? Because it was your data. It was government data. So don't ask me who I am. Don't track me. But as with any good digital service, the further away you are from your users over time, the further away the service is from the users themselves. So in a sense, although we call it a data platform, it's more like a digital service for joining up data sets that are important to the city. And we are creating a data users community that can guide the development of that platform so it becomes more and more useful for those people who use data, whether they're in the universities, whether they're in local councils, whether they're in the government, whether they're in civil society. All of these parts will be reflected in our platform. And there are a range of other things that we're doing. Some of them we can do ourselves, but some of them, I'm afraid, requires a step change in the view of central government to local government and how data is collected. One of the big challenges is legacy IT. If you ask the government now, what technology supports local public services in the United Kingdom, you would not be able to get an answer. It's quite shocking. But from our analysis in London, we can reveal to you that in every vertical, there are probably 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 dominant suppliers who've totally carved up the market, are stewards of your data in social care and housing repairs and things like that, refuse to develop APIs to share that data for legitimate purposes unless you pay them. And even so, kind of are a bit unwilling to do that further down the roadmap. So this critical information about citizens that we could use to get value from, not commercial value, but value in terms of better services for you, better services, better insights into what's happening across a region. So looking further into homelessness or what's happening to school admissions or waste and recycling, and how it relates to other data that we have in our city is actually very, very hard, if not impossible, to come by. So overcoming that barrier is also a technology and government challenge that needs to be addressed by the next government. So whether that's a new sort of local data service funded by the government, whether it's a Competition and Markets Authority investigation into legacy IT, you know, I'm right behind that, or otherwise, I think that kind of abusive behaviour by industry is a major, major barrier against us if we're thinking about, you know, urban innovation using data. And of course, digital transformation, if you really want to create great and responsive services to citizens, cannot happen without that data transformation. It also should matter for national government. You know, here we are in the home of mission-oriented innovation. The one that I was working on doesn't seem to have a chart, but it was the one on AI. But, you know, a Labour government, a future Labour government wants to look at how it can implement missions. It cannot effectively deliver on missions without local data. You cannot just rely on Whitehall and central government data to deliver joint solutions that are responsive to citizens, to encourage behaviour change, to provide for digital twins, insight and analysis. This needs to unlock local data. So missions will fail without this being addressed too. So it should be of concern to national government, not just local government, that these changes are made. So I'll make a final point here. Look, I mean, London, urban data doesn't just exist, you know, with a kind of city institution. We have Transport for London, another city institution. It releases live feeds of data, helped you get here this evening. The NHS is adopting a federated data system, so it will be able to share data on your patient record, anonymize it for research purposes. There's a lot going on that are not just, you know, kind of just city services and transport. The police also have quite an evolved data program so they can understand crime and safety. We are just at a time, actually, more than when I started my job 6 years ago, where this discussion is really coming to the fore. So I think in my sort of final analysis, a new approach which recognises the connection between national and local around data is well overdue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Theo, for this. For this really, I think, powerful statement around missions and data and local and central, because I think UK indeed was, with Mike Brecken and other people, leading at a national level, whereas in other places like Barcelona or in Germany, the cities are actually sort of ahead of the game in many ways. So I think UK, in many ways, has this interesting competitive advantage, if you will, that both the national and the local level can really come together if there is a political will. So you all know what to do in the next elections to help this to come about. But we have Henri, you are now online. So I can give the floor to you to react. So hopefully you see us here as well. And thank you very much for joining us from this, I think overseas. Yeah, thanks. Please go ahead.
Yes, Merci. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to exchange with you. I did listen to Francesca, and then I lose my connectivity, but now that's okay. I'm in Washington, D.C. For a long bilateral strategic dialogue regarding a lot of digital issues, but I did find 1 hour to be with you. Very briefly, first, thank you, because that's a very important topic we are discussing today. And I want to add, or maybe not, maybe you did mention more or less, I want to share with you 2 convictions. First, that's important because cities are very complex systems that we don't really know. I remember when in France, for example, we decided to launch the Grand Paris. We are investing currently 3.5 billion euros to build new trains and new metros, and without any efficient model of the transportation in the Grand Paris era. That's just political bargaining. The most powerful politician has a metro station and the other doesn't have, and we don't have any proper model. This we did realize it in France 5 or 6 years ago. So now for transport data, we did progress a bit, and probably because of the companies, because the transport companies themselves, they did ask for better data, because they knew that if you know just metro data, but you don't have bus data or taxis data or personal cars data, or you don't have the global model and you cannot take good decisions. So now in France, we're in a regional organization, we have a data lake for transport data, but we didn't go towards all the city organization. So if we want to be efficient, we need to have complete models, and to have complete models, we need to have to share more and more data. One example about what we could do with good data, I don't know if you know, but the French company Dassault Systèmes, they had a deal with Singapore. The name of the project is Cool City, but just while designing better the city itself, you can save 3 degrees because you organize wind and the shadow and so on, and you can save 3 degrees with 0 energy costs, just with a better conception of the city. But that's the other reason why we should pay attention to open data and digital commons, because we'll have more and more propositions from brilliant minds and big tech companies to build for us, without us, a better city. And from my view, the smart city cannot just be an expert city. A real smart city needs a citizen engagement, needs a citizen in the loop. And if we don't share the data, if we don't allow everyone to innovate, if we don't prove to the people that they can be in charge, that we need them, that if we don't have a big citizen engagement, most of the smart cities will become dystopian cities. And I deeply think this. Smart city without smart democracy is a dystopic city, and democracy in this field needs data sharing and the ability to innovate, unleash innovation to everyone. And we can also be specific about this. We could say that to decide where will be the banc public, where will people stay, and we need the neighborhood. You cannot decide with a big architect. So that's why I think we are speaking about very important things. Two more reflections. First, if we enlarge a bit the debate, and Francesca did announce a bit that I will speak briefly about the European Digital Foundation, and we are trying to promote with the form of an EDIC, which is a Brussels acronym for Brussels type of organization. If we pay attention a bit, most of the digital economy relies on open source, open data, open standards. And people tend to forget it more and more. We have to face biggest and biggest companies. They are stronger and stronger. They do invest a lot. We are speaking, as you said, Francesca, about war, about security. And we tend to, yes, to forget that the essence of the digital revolution is about commons. First, We also let some companies to deploy a strategy of captures. They do capture or mines or data or creations and it's time to have a positive engagement to fight for this ecosystem and to finance this ecosystem. And if you observe carefully, there are not any real European strong foundation to finance those projects. And finance, protect, help. We all remember the Log4j controversy. So suddenly, 2 or 3 years ago, I don't remind, we discovered that half of the world industry was using one common software, Log4j, with a big security failure. But when we did investigate a bit, this software was a free software developed by 2 developers, 2 Canadian developers alone, working for free for half of the world industry. And no one did propose to help them, never. Not a security audit, not sending one engineer to help them, not paying the servers, nothing. So they were alone. Everyone did yell when we discovered the failure, but we did build all the industry on some free voluntary-based development. We have to be there, not to control, not to take the control, but to be helpful, to be able to protect, to finance a bit, to offer a server or whatever they need, those communities. And that's why France is promoting the idea that we need at the European level a foundation to, yes, and you need to find money to create an average political vehicle to speak and speak and speak is easy, but to find real money and real governance of this money with the communities to finance tactically what need to be financed, that's the challenge. So that's a bit slow, but yes, we are progressing and I have good expectations that we will have this new tool. One last comment, if you speak about the data describing the city, some of them are sensitive. Of course, I am a big advocate of open data. I did run the French agency for open data during 5 years, and that's one of the fights of my life. So I know that you can share much more data than you think, but sometimes you have to pay attention to privacy. You have to pay attention to industrial property or to security itself. So that's the situation also for health, for example. And here I just want to share with you a very interesting thing I'm observing in India that's very close to the field of digital commons, but they name it digital public infrastructure. Sometimes that are infrastructure of commons, sometimes not. Sometimes the governance is not shared, but that's always seen as a public service. And this idea that maybe we could pay attention to the need of a small layer of public service that can be very, very, very small. Theo, if I'm correct, you did mention the need to convince the private sector to use the APIs. So in India, for example, the famous payment system, the UPI, Unified Payment Interface. That's just a framework of APIs, plus a legal duty for the companies to organize themselves as they want to be able to receive transaction orders through this API or to emit transaction orders through this API. When they say we did develop an infrastructure, that's not an infrastructure. That's a framework describing APIs, plus the obligation to use those API, plus an independent authority to see if they did implement it correctly and if they try to use it to, again, capture a market. That's all. And while designing a digital public infrastructure for cities, we could also pay attention to the sensitivity of some data. So maybe it's time to think not just in terms of openness, but also in terms of architecture and how we manage to preserve different securities we need, privacy, security, and to open as much as possible the data, because as I said, that's a matter of efficiency and a matter of democracy. And now I will listen to you because I did save one more hour to stay with you. And I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Henri. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us from afar as well and taking the time and for your excellent comments. I think, Francesca, you had a question for Theo.
No, I mean, no, just in a conversational way. It's not really a question, but I was curious to know because a lot of the work we have done in Hamburg and we want to continue to do now in Germany and not only in Europe was based on this idea that voluntary data sharing from the private sector is not enough. Because somehow, we tested, like we actually tested in practice. If there is no mandate, legal mandate, it's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. Maybe you do find, for example, we had like really companies like these IoT companies or some innovative companies willing to share because they saw that, okay, potentially, they could gain more insights, they could gain access to the public sector that for them was very interesting and so on. But then the problems, for instance, of compliance or they weren't sure about things, they were higher, and the public sector was really kind of, if you do not, basically just relying on some voluntary, way to do it, it doesn't work. So we do need mandate this in the legal way. Which means, I think it's part of the conversation we are having. So when we're talking about public digital infrastructures, first of all, we have to look at where this is needed. But I think we have identified some areas where this is needed. One area is data for public interest. Another area may be the digital identity, and that's why actually Europe is rolling out a framework, a digital ID wallet, which I think is a very good framework, and probably and hopefully it gets adopted in the right way. Payments is another area. So we do know, and then maybe, okay, Henri was talking about some of the software that, a lot of the open source community relies on, the libraries and so on. That's kind of more maintenance, of the infrastructure that's not done, and we need to do it with public investment. But so the question, I'm curious to know what you think. It's not a question. Is like, how do we, for example, London has thought of mandating data sovereignty or data, I don't know, call it as you want, data for citizens clauses in the procurement contracts?
It depends. Transport for London, when it trialled e-scooters in beginning it with, I think, 13 of the London boroughs all at once in 1 year, which is unprecedented amount of collaboration at the time, mandated the sharing of data of where the bikes were left, so that the operator could go and pick up the pile of bikes outside the King's House, or wherever they were left. There were stipulations on that that were introduced by the TfL innovation team, so we just didn't get into problems with deployment. And so I think there is certainly a case for mandating, depending on what. I've got an example where we don't mandate, but it works perfectly well. One of our data services, called the infrastructure mapping application, is effectively the closest we have to a data trust in London. What that does is it brings in data, commercially sensitive data from utility companies, which are famously from the private sector in the UK, and they put forward their forward build plans in one place that is shared securely at the Greater London Authority, so that they coordinate the digging up of the roads for electricity pipes, gas pipes, connectivity pipes, and so on. So they despoil our public realm just once rather than repeatedly. And that brings great efficiency to them because there is a tax on them for renting out the piece of road for digging a pipe. So they make a saving. And of course, we benefit from reduced congestion, reduced disruption for citizens, reduced air pollution. So I would say that I like the idea of really looking at, the common needs And I fear that sometimes mandating puts you in the territory where you're not really thinking about design right at the start. And because the design had a kind of element of self-interest for everyone, it really works. So I'm not saying you're saying don't do design, but I'm just giving you an example of like something where there's just like the really right balance between the parties and no mandating is needed.
I mean, if I can respond, because I think this is really interesting conversation, because at some point, like in our project, we brought those conversations to an extreme. And the provocation that we were doing, it wasn't really a provocation, but it was a legal, let's say, provocation, was like, well, why don't we do a general data sharing law for all of Germany? So in a sense, like, you are legally mandating that the norm is data sharing. I mean, this is, because the thing is like, and then on top of the data sharing, you apply the actual regulation. So privacy, trade secret, and so on. But the norm should be that if there are no obstacles, I mean, if there are no particular protection laws, so protection law apply by law. So the default should be that data is shared for public interest, and then protection laws are there to protect, you know, the different specific needs. So it's almost like reversing the topic that the data belongs to the company. The data, it doesn't really, you know what I'm saying?
The UK government would argue that there already is a law in the UK which says you can share data, and it's in the Digital Economy Act, and the government always sort of says, well, why isn't data being shared? You've got a law enabling you to do that. The real question is, can you? You know, and what's your risk appetite? What are the considerations of all of the points that you've put out in the paper? And that's what prevents people doing things with data. It's people's capability and people's interpretation of the law and their ambitions, and also like their vision for what data can do. And I've, you know, sort of, I know there's a question about sort of democratic oversight, but, you know, the question of like digital maturity amongst people, decision makers, is a real challenge. If you asked a lot of people who ran things what they think about data, they go, I see data all the time, because there's lots of you know, I see lots of performance data which tells me whether something's amber or green or red, and, you know, all of these things. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about data that flows into a new service for someone. And so that taking people who are leaders on the journey, that this is a fundamental part of creating a responsive service to your citizen, is, you know, is one of the friction points on why we don't use data more.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it applies. I think Henri wants to say something, but I was going to say that it applies also to open source, because he mentioned it, and we have legislation. Actually, even in Italy, we do have a legislation that mandates open source for the public administration. But it's not really applied, so the law is there, but then in practice is different.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think
that's my point.
Go ahead, Henri.
Yeah, if I can, that's my point. We have this law in France. So the law in France is open by default, closed if needed. And you have to prove the need to close. It did help, but if you don't have very committed people that encourage or push the administrations to open, the law is not enough. And for a very simple reason. As a public servant, you manage data all the day. And if I say you have to open everything, what is everything? Do I for example, now I'm an ambassador. I have a lot of dinners. Do I have the duty to publish the list of the guests of the dinners? Do I have to publish cities what I visit? So where does it start? Where does it end? So that's difficult. That can be seen as a resource for the open data promoters, but that's not enough. In France, after this, we did add another strategy. The EtaLab started to build some big APIs. So one for geographical information, one for tax information, was more sensitive with personal data. And that was very efficient, because most administration went to us saying, oh, can I use the API? And I say, of course, that's free, that's for you. But you also have one information that does interest the others. So please come on, but please come with your data. And this work to try to engineer bits to build APIs was very efficient. So that's a second resources. And yes, by the way, we have the same law. So everything that the government develops has to be open source. But sometimes it did convince some administrations to buy instead of developing themselves to avoid the openness. So pay attention to this too.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's one questioner in the chat was also around this question: how can you convince politicians, particularly and leaders, to come along on this API journey? And I think, as you mentioned, Theo, I think this connection to main public services, I think, is very important. And also in terms of Henri's question, where do we stop this openness by mandate? And I think if it is around basic public services, I think this is what you can convince the leaders of as well, that you can actually...
Yeah. I mean, you're never going to convince a leader with the words, we need more APIs. You know, I think where we will have more joint interest between private sector and cities and the citizen is around net zero. Because government can't do it all by itself. Citizens and individual businesses must change their behaviour. So how do we create the right tools for people to make decisions for themselves? And the private sector and government won't be able to fund, you know, there's some sum which is like, to retrofit London will cost over 100 billion. And I think that's quite a conservative estimate. Mm-hmm. And 1% of that money is currently from public funds. So the way in which this is going to happen over the next 2 decades will be through things like new business models, incentives for people to put in a bit of money, you know, green mortgages or whatever people, you know, fashion. Those will be reliant upon data, business models that are created from sensors and incentivizing people to do things. So that is like a really big opportunity for the private sector to sort of make plays, kind of going like, okay, well, here's a 20-year, you know, sort of green mortgage for you, or whatever it is, that will pay for your solar panels and so on and so forth. So these, I think these are the kind of, if there's one area that I think there is much more of an interesting coalescing discussion, it is around this, the climate emergency that will open up a conversation with private sector organisations, I think, under their corporate social responsibility banner, that the data that they kind of would like to monetise but never get round to is actually quite useful and can actually be part of the solution in a city. But here's hoping.
Did you want to respond to that, or you're good? To this discussion that was going on, but happy to open it for the question from the floor. Is others? Can somebody give the microphone to maybe this microphone? We can take like a couple of questions from the floor, and so if anybody else wants to ask, raise your hand. There's one here, and
hi.
I think you were.
Oh, should I go? Yeah.
Yeah. Go.
I'm currently working in the West Midlands, one of our. In one of the largest cities, well, the second largest city in Britain. And part of the work we're trying to do is economic planning and a better approach to that. And so I was sort of interested in your thoughts around some of that, because part of that is how do we get the best data to then drive decision making, to drive allocation of resources, to drive integration of resources, to really grow the economy. And the context for this is, you know, we've had 15 years of stagnant growth in the UK. All our cities outside of London are not performing against the metrics, and you can see that from other cities. And we've got very centralised systems, particularly in England. And so we've got to really grow our cities. But to do that, and there's a devolution deal at the moment in the West Midlands and working with on that, you know, we've got to really grow the economies. And then how do we get all these funding streams signed up? So it's not just about public services that we traditionally may think of opportunities around this. It's how do we do economic renewal, economic planning, economic growth, and there's really a data path to that, and that's what we're building at the moment. It was just particularly thoughts from the colleagues from different jurisdictions and countries, and I know Theo, from old. London's a slightly different case in this. But anyway, that's the general point, because this is a key task ahead for us as a country.
Okay, thank you. And let's take a few more. Just we have lady in front here. Let's take, because then you can, if you can remember.
Thank you. I guess quick one for me, but then the answer might be a bit longer. So I work in cybersecurity, so very much know the data around there. And the latest DCMS report showed that we're missing about 11,000 cybersecurity professionals in the UK, which is pretty sad. But we're seeing similar numbers in digital and data. I was wondering if you had any thoughts, feedback, I guess initiative, interventions around building digital skills in government, local authority and companies, because any data sharing requires change in architecture, and that's not something we can just do with the current labour market. So anything there, really interested to hear.
Awesome, and let's take the gentleman over there in green. And then we...
Good. So I come from, working here in the university, but I've been involved in the open source communities for quite a long time. And one of our biggest problems is retention of the people to collaborate and contribute on them. So, and you were mentioning, Theo, about making collecting their names to know who they are and what they do. But I'm wondering, in all these things, my question is about what else can we do to involve more the people, to get them more engaged with the things, rather than, yes, you can make a business, or yes, you can do the things, but how you build that community of users, citizens, that will benefit from the data, and they keep contributing there.
Great, so we have 3 interventions or questions and comments, so we can start with you.
Henri, do you want to? Yeah.
We can start, but I was very interested because we can connect the 2 last questions. Because, of course, everything is difficult. We have a global lack of skills, and to be frank, that's even more difficult to hire them within the public service. There is a global lack of recognition of the principles of the open source community within the government. I had to publish an instruction to tell to the administration that they should encourage their agents to join such communities, and that, yes, they will have to sign their contribution. The governments don't like individualization and naming the brave people that did succeed. But here we have to, because that's about accountability also. So there is a global problem, but we can try to build a virtuous circle, because the more you open your data, if you pay attention to open innovation, if then you listen what the people think about your data, if you accept their proposition to improve your data, if you pay attention to their innovations, then you find people that will try to join you. And if you do this, if you hire people from the open source and open innovation community, then you will understand better those communities and you will find new allies. So you need a complete change of culture, but you can try to fix everything in the same movement. Francesca, can I have a very brief answer also to the first question? Very briefly, to say that especially for cities, you have a magic power, a special power, because you give a lot of public contracts. And just a simple idea, always think to add a clause to your public contract to say that you will have the right to do whatever you want with the data, for a free-floating bicycle, for water distribution, for whatever. In France, I tried to share some. You say the same, Francesca, before, or?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's something that the central government can try to help while sharing good clauses to show how they could ask. And maybe on the contrary, when you privatize something, never forget to keep the data. And if I can share a funny story against UK, sorry for this. So I was very close to the transparency team. We were very friends, and we did exchange a lot of good practices, etc. With Paul Maltby and those people. And once we decided to share what were your biggest data file, data sets, the most used data sets. So I said, I start. In France, that's the zip code file. And I see that my friend Paul became gray and white and gray again. And he told me, oops, when we did privatize the postal service, we did privatize also this file. And now we have to pay 300,000 pounds a year to use this document. And okay, so if you have to privatize your postal service, keep the zip code for you. Don't sell it.
That's a great story, actually. Yeah. I mean, I can add on what Henri said, but I think I pretty much agree. So I start with the open source community because for me it's very important to start there. I think they should be part. They should be a core part of the government strategy. I mean, I think what's happening there is that the government feels they are completely a separate thing, and they look at legacy tech, and they look at the big provider and the big consultancy firms as their friends, while they should put at the very center the open source community, because the open source community need the government, and they need the reliance, the funding, the public infrastructure. Also, they need each other, basically. And I actually think that Europe's only possibility to catch up and have an autonomous trajectory, what we call digital sovereignty, in this moment is really to do it like that, to do it differently. We are not going to compete with the big tech. I mean, we are nowhere in that space for a variety of reasons. But we do better. We have a lot of diversity. We do better. We have a social welfare economy. We do have other points, and we have a lot of skills actually, and those skills, why they're not here? Well, we train them here. Well, we fund them here. And then, when they have to raise money, VC money, when they have to build a startup, when they have to work, they go to Silicon Valley. I mean, sorry, we have a problem. We need to retain our talent because we do train them. Actually, we do. And we have some of the best. I mean, Europe is not very good also at telling its story, because some of the best, for example, security researchers, that are in Europe. I mean, even the people that built the most important part of the security of Apple, Google, they're Europeans. They are Europeans. It's built actually here, but for Google, for Apple. In the blockchain space, we know also that lots of the key developers, Switzerland, still Europe, although, a bit but yeah. There's the main cluster is there in Switzerland between European, because we have a lot of privacy and security researchers, top quality. We don't pay them enough. So they have to go abroad. We don't give them enough resources. I think this is what we need to change. And then, another problem is how do we hire them in the public sector? Yeah, this is also another problem. So maybe we have to build these new institutions, new agencies. Yeah, they are needed, because somehow, how did you hire? I don't know, how did they hire the GDS at the moment? Is there some people from the GDS? Well, exactly, and actually a lot of people from the open source community, I know that they do double, 3 lives, because maybe in the morning they have to work for the big companies, then in the afternoon in the night they code for the open source community, then they work, multiple jobs and so on. But I'm sure, because I know a lot of the people do what they do in their spare time as a hobby, because of course they don't have an alternative. So I think it's our duty. Now I'm not, thanks God for the moment, in the public sector, but I've been working quite some time on this kind of jobs. It's our duty, I think, when we are there, to get in an alliance with these communities, to consider them as a very core part of what we do with the public, as public, yes? So I believe. And then, finally, on the economic development. So I think one part is this question of contracting, tendering, public contracts, but also even licensing. You have a lot of power in the licensing. Now we're talking about electric chargers, for example, and you need to give license. You need to do license to operate in your city. When you do the licensing, put the requirements, put the clauses, how you want things. Basically try to negotiate with these companies on public interest terms. This is also what Marianna says all the time about how you do industrial policy, that you need to do requirements where you negotiate for public interest. So you Conditionalities, yes, conditionalities. And I think you do it by integrating clauses. And then the economic strategy of the region, it's a key element to do all those kind of projects. We've done it like that also when I was in Barcelona, not Barcelona, but the metropolitan area. So you need so smaller cities, I think, to respond to this decentralization, centralization. I think you need that middle level scale institution that can drive these changes. It can't be too small, it can't be too decentralized, but it also doesn't have to be too centralized. I think the metropolitan scale planning will be really very important instrument.
On the issue of Jake's point about regional growth and what you can do. I mean, in London, I think where we want to get to is to answer the question, what is the critically enabling data that our city needs, and how can we get it? How can we ensure it's high quality, and how can we spur innovation from that? So I think for a region, certainly all of the stuff in the spatial place, planning, data, enumeration, knowing what you have is absolutely fundamental for the seizing of opportunity. Now, just a very little story. When I came to the Greater London Authority, and one of the main powers of the Greater London Authority is strategic planning, I was just of the view as Chief Digital Officer, I just said, okay, what's our main power? And let's make sure the data behind it is good. And so I asked them, how do you collect planning data from London? And they went, well, some authorities send us an upload every Saturday night, and one gives us a PDF every 18 months, right? That was the planning system of London. So anyone talking about housing numbers before our recent innovation had no earthly idea what was going on. And that is essentially the planning system across the country. Now, we invested quite a lot of money in it, supported by Paul Maltby as well. And now we have a live feed, and it's open data. So you can go on now onto our planning data hub and find out how many residential completions there are. And we can use it for all sorts of things. Today I was talking to our head of planning change, and we have such a role. He's called head of planning change. And he was talking about the findings that were coming through, that because of house prices in London, where some London boroughs are actually closing primary and secondary schools because they just want the kids coming through, those London boroughs were also facing huge demand for kindergarten placings. Essentially what's happening is that in some areas of London, people are raising their kids up to the age of 4 going, it's too expensive, or we're having another child, and moving somewhere else. And so it's totally subverting the kind of idea that, boroughs have a kind of, with a margin of error, X number of primary schools, Y number of nurseries, and a certain number of secondary schools, and that it's fed all the way through. It's much more dynamic. So I think you can really use data to start plotting some of the big changes that are driven by the big factors affecting people's lives, like high housing prices. And let's flip it around and go why are we not? We know it's an issue. Why are we not asking the question about what is the impact of things like this? So obviously West Midlands, you will have certain other dynamics. I don't know how far, things like the live transport feed is gone. But if you're a region that is heavily reliant on bus services, and I live outside of London these days, as you know, where there's one bus per hour that serves the town between between Hazelmere and the next town, and I've got to look at a piece of paper to tell me if it's going to come or not. This is just totally unacceptable. But it's standard service in London because we're fed. We have good data that feeds all of our apps, but it is not the case elsewhere in the country. So why aren't we kind of doing more challenge to make sure that people get the service that was created 10 years ago? Anyway, end of rant. I mean, yes. Look, I mean, on the issue of talent. Look, I think that we have come to a point where, look, you can go and work. If you want to get a job in in data and technology and work for a gaming company or fintech, you can do that and fill your boots. But there's a generation of people who've done that who now want to have something a little bit more purposeful. So the public sector's got to make itself attractive to people who can come and work with purpose between 9 to 5, have a decent pension. Okay, you're not going to make millions, but you'll make good money, work-life balance, raise your kids, come and work for us. And that is our pitch, and we've got to make it better. And I think that's the way we do it, because it's great.
Thank you so much. Yes, so apply. So let's do a quick round of, because we have 6 minutes left, so time flies when you have good company, good ideas, good discussion. Not yet. Anyway, I think we have a gentleman in the orange, Jordan and Mariga, so we'll do all of these, all of you three.
That was really interesting. I guess the kind of question here is twofold. One around process and the other one around the long-term sustainability. And I guess the way I'm thinking about this is more from an organizational point of view. So you've talked about this organization that could be built, and some good examples have been given. We've got an NHS, we've got a BBC, we've also got TfL. But the way that they're funded, if you're going to fund it through tax money, they can also be quite heavily influenced by the government of the day. So I guess my question in terms of the long-term sustainability thing is what the case for political interference and how important making its own commercial income as a way of reducing that dependency on tax money, and whether you've thought about that. The other question was more around the process element. And I think the case study, again, sorry, it's quite UK-based, is the NHS and its new Planeteer contract. And so I'm kind of interested into to build this sort of infrastructure, our reliance on other companies and third parties to build it, and whether we should be building it ourselves and whether we have the capability to do so.
Great, and let's go Jordan back. And because there was also, we have mentioned GDS many times, and there's one of the first employees of GDS, Richard Pope, actually online, has asked a question about democratic oversight. So this is sort of with your first question. So Jordan.
Hi, so a few of you mentioned digital public infrastructure, and from what I've seen is it requires like a fundamental shift in thinking inside the public sector, inside like with civil servants, with ministers, and I was just curious and what you've seen in conversations is like the biggest barriers to getting that mindset shift to really occur, to think in more of a platform and an infrastructure type of way.
Great, and let's do the final question from Mariga here. If you have studied with us, you get the privileges to ask the questions.
One of the things I learned in practice, moving into public sector after school here, was just how data works, right? So I learned by far that most public sector is like governance by Excel sheet, what he's talking about. Like you'd be shocked at the amount of things which are just on Excel sheets. That's the only place they exist in these whole organizations. Yeah, that's it. but beyond that, you realize a lot of that. So, but one of the things I was curious about is you talked about 2 or 3 platforms essentially control a lot of the data in the UK public sector, right? Between Microsoft, Google, and probably one other company, they hold a ton of data, like email data and a lot of these things, right? But that's just one sector. Now, my question is around competition authority law in terms of this, right? Because what would the best approach be? Because I was trying to figure out what's the legislative solution to this, right? Because you can't mandate councils to only use a certain kind of provider, and many times like these bigger platforms have bigger scale and capacity and always win the contracts. And so you can't say that, if Microsoft is in 10 councils, it can't be used by another 20 or 30. It's one of these things. So what's the legislative solution to but then if you break it up and you have 50 or 60 different providers, it means that the government has to deal with 60 different providers when it comes to data. And that becomes a way complex problem. So how do you deal with data protection when it comes to innovation and data access?
Thanks so much. And maybe, Henri, we start with you, as you are online. And
Maybe the answer, the question on
the second one, the cultural question.
So briefly, but I will answer to both. I don't have there is no silver bullet, of course, but first, I think that we should encourage, promote, deploy more open source in our systems. That's not so difficult, that's not so expensive. For example, that's an experience I did, but I did create a cloud for the Ministry of Interior that didn't cost much more than AWS. It was not much more expensive. And that's, I think that within European countries, we are starting to understand this. And for example, France and Germany, they are developing a shared, not a shared, they are developing the public servant desk. So the open source Word, the open source Excel, the open source Trello, but while building interoperability to be sure that it will be interoperable. And then we intend to extend it to other member states, and we can make as if UK were still a European member on these topics. We could extend the cooperation with the UK. So that's the first importance. We can, that's not so expensive, that's not so difficult, deploy more open source software because we cannot have this level of dependence. And the second thing is that DPI matters too, because if we conceive a clear DPI, digital public infrastructure, you can afford a big variety of private solutions, but you don't allow anyone to take the control. In India, for example, I did mention UPI, and now there are 600 payment solutions based on UPI, including Google Pay, which is very important in India, but they cannot control the market because the government is there with a very small layer of public service. And that is a very good governance tool. And to answer to the cultural question, but Francesca, you might have much other answers. Yes, there is a cultural need, but we are not so far, because when you look carefully, that's very close to the very old vision of public service. And as you know, public service can be private, doesn't have to be free. You can have a paid service, public service, but they have to respect some rules. And basically, they cannot take control of the value chain. That's the essential rule of public service. They cannot force the users to share their revenues. So when you have to pay, that's a fixed price to pay the costs of the infrastructure, not to make profits. But the question is, of course, this is here, that's, yes, the culture of the most decision maker. You did joke earlier about how to convince a politician to design an API. If you add based on open standards and respecting an interoperability scheme with a real community of contributors that does respect the pull request, you lose the politician. So the only question is how to convince the politician that what they did with roads, trains, and water supply a century ago, and that did create the prosperity and autonomy of Europe, now we need to do the same for digital ID, payment interfaces, and such things. So we will succeed all together, but they don't think about this, of course.
Thank you. Theo? I think one of the questions was like, what shift is needed, and are we just, dependent on in quite a centralized country about government giving money or not giving money, and will that harm us? Well, yeah, it will. I mean, look at TfL; it's been sort of battered about as a political football for a number of years. There's TfL undoubtedly has lost staff with huge skills and capability who've just left because if your funding only lasts for 3 months, then 6 months, then a year, it's quite shocking how that can happen. I think the government. Or the present government in relation to local government and getting things done, I think the relationship is just totally cooked. I don't think it is not healthy. It's very, very ideological, and to sort of mix metaphors, you totally got to reset the relationship, of which it then provides an opportunity for us to have a conversation about not just devolution and fiscal powers and things like that, but actually, in this day and age, about data, about innovation. And I think so there could be a sort of timely moment about that if let's say there was a change in administration, the new government, the new Labour government, kind of avoided the tendency that it has had historically to just sort of channel its inner Fabian and kind of like find the lever box and start pulling it. And I think that's the challenge that you get with left administrations, and with right-wing ones, you kind of got a general sort of like, I think all parts of the state that I don't run directly are the dead hand of the state. So I'm not going to respect them. So I'm not saying rock in a hard place. I think there could be an opportunity coming from this. So I will. I mean, given that I'm a politically restricted job, I will end my comments there.
Thank you very much. And for the final comment, Francesca.
Yeah. No, funny. That was a nice closing comment.
No, I think it was very interesting how you put it, because I think we have to turn it around again, because you assume that taxation money, it's politicians. Well, I mean, actually, taxation money is our money. It is our money. It's the citizens' money, and actually the people that pay taxes are actually the working class, because there is a lot of tax evasion, in particular in the sectors that we're discussing. So I think we need to build robust public digital institutions and infrastructures that are actually financed by all of us, but independently managed, meaning that there is no political interference, it's not state control, but it's run in a democratic, accountable way. That's why I think we're doing those kind of research of like, how do a BBC for data, or how does a BBC for next generation services look like? So I don't know. Obviously, it will be a lot of work, a lot of struggles, a lot of to have it funded by the people, managed in an accountable and democratic way. Now, I don't want to sound too idealistic. It's not. It's what we need. And we don't only need it in technology. We need it to enable the essential services of society. Think about culture. I mean, now, I am not anymore in that job where I can't talk. And I can tell you that, in Italy, at this moment where we have a very right-wing government, and I sit in the board of the public TV, like the BBC, it's called RAI, we have a strong fight because the government is actually controlling the CEO, the directors, what we screen and so on. But this is a public service. And people are not going to pay taxes anymore to fund a service that's government controlled for their own propaganda. I mean, no. So we do need, I think, urgently those kind of new models. And we do have to avoid that institutions like the NHS, which are the core of the welfare state that can allow for universal services like healthcare for all, that we see how important it is. Yeah, I mean, if you get Palantir there, you better know what they're doing. So you better make it transparent. Because actually, if they're only doing something, they're a company that you better know what they're doing. And also you better know what data they access. And you saw it with DeepMind. I think it would have been much better for the UK to have DeepMind as, sorry, can I say this, as a UK company. I mean, why not? Also ARM and a lot of other technology companies, you're losing. Why? You're losing the core of your capabilities in the future. Why? Because there is no strategy. And I think, you can balance what you should be, what you should be public, what you should be private. But I think, those are the critical questions for the future. So maybe this, kind of wrapping it up, I think we do need those experimentation more. We do need public digital infrastructure. We do need more skills. And yes, I think the public sector in the future, if it wants to resist and continue to provide the services for the people and continue to fund the public schools, healthcare, and the things we need in the cities, it has to transform. And it has to transform to a digital transformation that otherwise it will be basically almost against, because we are not going to gain more expertise, capabilities, and transform. We're going to shrink it again and again and again. And then we will be here reflecting, why don't we have skills? Why don't we have capabilities? Because we're losing it. So I think that those kind of conversations are important to be positive in the spirit and to see how do with new governments new things. I mean, I hope for the UK, like a new government probably, you move forward and you put this central in the agenda. And to finish, I agree very much with Theo when he says it's not really, the conversation shouldn't be about building APIs, I'm sorry. It also shouldn't be about real data. It should be about net zero, it should be about affordable housing, it should be about more green areas, it should be about better schools, better public education, because that's what we're talking about. The digital public infrastructure, the data, just enable that. But that's not the conversation. The conversation is about what people care. Because otherwise, we're always going to be the geeks talking about technology and then people being desperate because the public sector doesn't work anymore. So I really support that idea that it's about the concrete things that matter to people, but then they need data, digital public infrastructures, and so on in order to actually succeed.
Thank you very much. It's a perfect ending and perfect summary, so I don't need to summarize anything. And I can only thank everybody on the panel and online as well for the wonderful, but also very good, spirited, future-looking, and eventually optimistic discussion. And thank you everybody here in the audience as well. And I love that we end on institution building is important. And here we are a School of Public Administration, so wonderful message. Thank you everybody. Thanks for coming.